The P3 level of the Harbourfront parking structure smelled like motor oil and old concrete, and the particular kind of cold that only exists underground in March, the kind that has nothing to do with temperature, and everything to do with being alone in the dark beneath several stories of city that does not know you're there. Darcy Cole was sitting on the floor beside a support pillar, her back against the grey concrete, her knees drawn up carefully against her chest. Her lower lip had split somewhere between the first hit and the second, and the blood had dried in a thin, dark line down her chin. She could feel the swelling beginning along her left eye socket, a hot, rhythmic pressure that pulsed with every heartbeat, very patient, very insistent. Seth had given them the access card to the parking level. She understood that now, the way they'd known which bay she'd parked in, the way the first man had said her name before he said anything else. Darcy Cole, Stirling's accountant, said in the tone of a man confirming a delivery address. She hadn't worked for Stirling in 3 years. The phone in her hand had a cracked screen from where it had hit the concrete during the struggle. She stared at the spider-web fracture across the glass and thought about who she could call. She thought about her sister in Winnipeg, who was 7 months pregnant and absolutely the wrong person for this. She thought about her colleague Bev at the firm, who brought homemade squares to staff meetings and would not know what to do with a parking garage and 2 broken ribs. She thought about calling the police. She stopped thinking about that almost immediately. Calling the police meant explaining. Explaining meant the audit files on her laptop, the files Seth had asked her, casually, to keep backed up on an unsecured home drive, just in case Babe, the office server's been glitchy, and which she had not until approximately 40 minutes ago understood the purpose of. Files she now recognized as the reason she was sitting on the floor of a parking structure in downtown Toronto with someone else's blood drying on her chin. She was not calling the police. She turned the cracked phone over in her hands. There was a number, 11 digits including the area code, that she had never entered into any contact list. She'd kept it in her head deliberately. The way you memorize the emergency exit when you walk into a building in a neighborhood you don't entirely trust. She had carried it for 3 years like a stone in her pocket, heavy, specific, never intended to be used. The man who had given her the number had told her exactly when she'd need it. When the world stops being as safe as you think it is, he'd said, in the flat and unhurried way he had of delivering things that sounded like observations and were actually promises, you'll use it. She pressed the cracked screen and dialed. It rang twice, then the line opened, and there was nothing but the ambient silence of a room, the faint hum of electronics, the distant suggestion of weather against glass, and a stillness so deliberate it had weight. Stirling. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. It's Darcy Cole. A pause, 3 seconds, 4. Then, low and unhurried, the voice she hadn't heard in 3 years. Are you bleeding? Yes. How badly? Not, I don't think anything's broken. My face, my ribs, maybe, I'm not certain. Where are you? P3, Harbourfront Parkade. Bay 114. She pressed the heel of her palm against her split lip. Seth gave them the access card, Stirling. They knew my name, they said. Stop. Not unkind. Factual. Don't move from where you are. Don't speak to anyone. If anyone approaches you before I get there, make noise. I'm 17 minutes away. The line went dead. Darcy sat back against the pillar and counted. It wasn't 17 minutes, it was 11. She heard them before she saw them. 2 sets of footsteps crossing the concrete, with a quiet that had nothing casual about it. Then the first figure came around the far pillar into the flat fluorescent light of Bay 114, and Darcy felt the particular sensation of being, for the first time in several hours, not entirely alone. Stirling had not changed. That was the first thing she noticed, and then she felt foolish for noticing, because 3 years was not enough time to meaningfully alter a man who had already been exactly what he was when she first met him. He wore a dark overcoat that fit him the way expensive things fit a man who has never needed to think about money. His hair was cut close at the sides, silver threading through it at the temples in a way she didn't remember. He was 42. He had the face of someone for whom making another decision cost no more effort than breathing, because he had made enough of them that the mechanism had worn smooth. He stopped in front of her and crouched to her eye level, the way you'd crouch in front of someone hurt to spare them the indignity of having to look up. His eyes moved across her face with the cool efficiency of a man taking inventory. Not cold. Something in it was too careful for cold, but contained. "Can you stand?" he asked. Yes. He didn't offer to help her up. He stood back and let her find her own footing, one hand on the pillar, and when she straightened, he was already looking at the periphery of the parking level, giving her the private space of not being watched while she got her balance. Behind him, a younger man with a jaw like poured concrete and hands that suggested he knew what to do with them was doing the same thing in the other direction. "Walk to the car," Stirling said. "Don't stop." "There are 2 of them still in the building," Darcy said. "I heard them go up the stairwell after." "I know, he was already moving. That's been handled." She didn't ask what handled meant. She walked. The car was a black SUV with the kind of suspension that absorbed Toronto's March potholes without comment. Stirling sat beside her. The man he'd called Lackland drove. No one spoke. Darcy sat with her hands in her lap and her head tipped back against the leather headrest and concentrated on breathing at a rate that didn't make her ribs scream. "You should have taken a cab from the office," Stirling said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the observation of a man reviewing a sequence of events for structural failures. "Seth needed the car," she said, "or I thought he did. He said his was in for service." She stopped. The sentence had nowhere useful to go. He didn't need the car. Stirling said nothing. "He needed me out of the apartment on foot," she said. Her voice did the thing voices do when the body is still catching up to what the brain has understood. Flat, almost mechanical, the emotion running underneath like cold water under ice. He needed me somewhere specific so they could. "Yes," Stirling said. She looked out the window at the rain-wet streets. The CN Tower was lit pale blue through the weather. A streetcar moved past on King, bright and ordinary, full of people going somewhere normal. "He knew you 3 years ago," Stirling said, working through it, sorting the timeline. "We'd only been together 6 months when I left the contract. He knew I'd had a job I didn't talk about. Not who it was for." She paused. "I thought." "He knew," Stirling said. She didn't ask how Stirling knew that already. She already understood that he'd spent the 11 minutes it took to reach her making calls that most people didn't have the numbers to make. "You need a doctor," he said. "Tonight everything else is tomorrow." She didn't argue. She was too tired and it was too accurate. The house was in Rosedale, set back behind a stone wall. She'd never been here. In the year she'd worked for his operation, she'd gone to an office on Bay Street, a legitimate-looking office with a receptionist and good coffee, and she had understood without being told that the office was for people he did business with, and this address was for something else entirely. A doctor arrived within 20 minutes. Dr. Fenn, 50s, carrying a worn leather bag, and the expression of a woman who had been doing this long enough that explanations were no longer required. She looked at Darcy with the direct and businesslike sympathy of someone who had seen this specific kind of situation before, and then she looked at Stirling. "I can see the patient myself," she said. He left without argument. "2 ribs," Dr. Fenson said. "5th and 6th left side. Not dangerous in themselves. No punctured pleura, lungs clear, but they would hurt reliably for the better part of a month." She cleaned the split lip with antiseptic that stung sharply, sealed it with tissue adhesive, and wrapped the ribs in compression bandaging so firm that breathing felt like pressing against a wall, but a steady wall, and after the last few hours steady was something. She left ibuprofen on the counter and told Darcy not to sleep on her left side. Stirling reappeared in the doorway, as if he'd simply been standing on the other side of it. 2 ribs, Darcy said. He nodded once. He led her down a hall, Low light, dark wood, art she didn't have the attention for, and into a room that had been prepared with specific thought. Bed made, water on the nightstand, clothes folded on the chair in precisely her size. Someone had made a call during the drive and she didn't ask about it. She stood in the middle of the room and felt the exhaustion press down through her, like gravity was finally making good on its promises. "Why did you answer?" She hadn't planned to ask. It came out anyway. "It's been 3 years. I walked out on the contract without 2 weeks' notice. You could have let it ring." He paused in the doorway. His back was to her. The hallway light caught the angle of his jaw. "You called that number," he said, "which means you had no one else. And there was never a version of this where I didn't answer that call." He turned his head slightly, not quite looking back. "Sleep, Darcy. I'll be here in the morning." The door closed. She lay down on her right side and listened to the rain and didn't sleep for a while, and then she did. Morning was grey through the curtains, the kind of grey that northern cities in early spring do without apology. Darcy found Stirling in the kitchen. Black shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, the old scarring on his left hand she remembered from before. Shot, years ago. He'd told her once when she asked, and neither of them had brought it up again. He set a mug of coffee in front of her without being asked. He sat across from her. He slid a folder across the island. She didn't open it immediately. "How long?" she asked. 18 months, he said, approximately. She looked at the cover of the folder. "He made contact with a man connected to a competing interest," Stirling continued. "A man named Reeve, who operates out of Hamilton. Seth told them he was involved with a woman who had previously contracted for an organization connected to mine. Over the following months, they paid him to find out more. Seth had excellent access. He watched you enter your credentials on multiple occasions. He has very good memory retention. It's in his old personnel file from his brokerage." "I kept everything encrypted," Darcy said. "Yes." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "He sold your work," Stirling said. "His contact used it to identify and undercut 3 of my distribution networks over the past 8 months. He paused. "Last week, Reeve's people shifted from intelligence gathering to collection. They told Seth they wanted the source. You specifically. They said they wanted to question you about what else you might know." Another pause. Seth negotiated terms. "Terms," Darcy said. "A finder's fee," Stirling said, "and the clearing of his own exposure." She put the mug down. She said it aloud because she needed it to be a fact and not a feeling. "He didn't panic and sacrifice me by accident. He arranged for me to be collected, in exchange for money." "Yes," Stirling said. "He didn't soften it. He never had. 3 years ago she had found that quality of his cold, and then she had come to understand it was the only genuinely honest thing in a world built from managed information. He told her what was true. He had always told her what was true." She pressed both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. For 3 years she had done everything correctly. She had left a situation that frightened her and built something careful in its place. A 2-bedroom apartment in the East End with a decent landlord, a job at a firm that filed everything in triplicate, a boyfriend who complained about the 401 and had a favorite Tim Hortons order and made her laugh sometimes, a boyfriend she had understood to be proof that she was capable of being a different kind of person. She looked at her hands and breathed through the ribs. "Where is he?" she said. "Mississauga," Stirling said. "Hotel. Lachlan has eyes on the room." "You're going to go." He didn't answer, which was an answer. "Don't," she said. She stood, which pulled at her ribs and made her breath catch, and she breathed through it. "Stirling, don't." He looked at her with the patience of a man who was listening, truly listening, which she had also always known about him, because he didn't waste the gesture. "He sent those men to that garage," he said. "I know," she met his eyes, "and I am not asking you to forgive him. I am asking you not to make me carry it. I spent 3 years trying to build something that had no one's blood in it. I know what you are. I know what your world costs. I left because I couldn't stop running the arithmetic." She held his gaze. If you do this, I have to add it to the ledger. I have to live with it in the column of things that happened because I made a bad decision 3 years ago. I don't want that, Stirling. I'm asking you for something specific, and I'm asking you plainly." He was quiet for a long moment. "You always kept very precise books," he said. "Yes." He picked up his phone. "Lachlan," he said. "Hold position, don't touch him." He set the phone down. "This is not a permanent arrangement," he said. "I'm holding a number, not closing it." "I understand. Reeves' people are not going to accept a clean severance." "I know." "Then you know what's coming." "Yes," she said, "I know what's coming." 2 hours later, he came back into the study, where she'd been sitting with a book she hadn't read, and set his phone on the table with a care that suggested he was managing his own calibration. "Seth talked," he said. "I assumed." "There's more." He sat across from her, which was new. The preceding 24 hours had been conducted with the careful geometry of respectful distance. He sat and he looked at her directly. Seth didn't stumble into this. He was recruited. A contact at his firm identified you 18 months before you met him as a former contractor for a numbered company linked to my organization. Seth was approached and paid to make contact with you, to get close enough to access whatever information moved through you. The room was very quiet. "He approached me at a gallery opening," Darcy said slowly. "Yes." "He asked for my number. He said he'd seen me twice before and kept losing his nerve." She could hear her own voice doing the flat, mechanical thing again, the processing voice, the voice that was buying time. He had a very good story about losing his nerve. Stirling said nothing. 3 years, she said. Every conversation about work. Every time he asked questions. Every time I thought he was just interested in my day. She pressed 2 fingers to her closed mouth. The adhesive on her lip was cool to the touch. He designed all of it. The whole thing. He came looking for me specifically. Yes. She had loved Seth, or she had believed she did, and in the living of it there had not been a meaningful distinction. She had loved him or loved what he was to her, which was evidence that she had successfully become a person who got to have ordinary things. She had loved him, and he had approached her like a mark, and spent 3 years being good at it. She didn't cry. She felt the tears form and felt them recede, displaced by something quieter and heavier and colder, a fury without heat in it, the kind that doesn't dissipate but calcifies. The men he was working with, she said. Reeves' operation. They're aware you're here, Stirling said. They made contact an hour ago. He watched her. They know what being here makes you. What does it make me? Mine, he said, simply, factually, not a declaration, a variable in an equation he was solving aloud. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a significant word, she said. It's an accurate one. I didn't come back here because I wanted to belong to anyone, she said. I came back because I was on the floor of a parking garage and you were the only number I could think of. I know. I am not, she stopped. Started again. I'm not ready to be anything tonight except someone who is sitting in your study with taped ribs and very few options. I'm not asking you to be anything tonight, he said. I'm telling you what is true. You can decide what to do with it when you're ready. He stood and went to the cabinet against the wall, poured 2 glasses of something amber, brought both, and held one out to her. She took it. What happens now? She said. Reeves' people do the mathematics, he said. They know you're here. They know what touching what's here would cost them. He settled back in the chair. They'll take 48 hours, and then they'll decide. And if they decide wrong. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his glass once in his hands. Then I correct their arithmetic, he said. She looked at him. The lamp was low. Outside, the rain had started again, steady and patient the way Toronto rain is in March, without apology. I should have changed the number, she said. Yes, he said, you should have. I didn't. No. She turned her glass in her hands. The whiskey was exactly what it was supposed to be, Everything in this house was exactly what it was supposed to be, no more and no less. And she had spent 3 years surrounded by things that were performing versions of themselves. I kept it, she said, because I thought I might need it someday, and I hated thinking that, so I never admitted it out loud. But I kept it. She looked at him. I kept it, and I didn't change it. Stirling held her gaze with the steadiness he'd always had, the steadiness of a man who did not look away from things. I know, he said. I'm not leaving, she said. I'm not saying that as a decision. I'm saying it as a fact. I don't have anywhere to go, and I don't particularly want to go there anyway. Those two things are not the same as choosing, but tonight. Tonight it's enough, he said. She nodded. They sat in the lamplight and the sound of rain on tall windows, two people with a shared and unfinished history, and a situation that would require decisions in the morning that neither of them was making yet. Darcy Cole held the whiskey glass and breathed carefully within the compression of her taped ribs and did not, for the first time in 3 years, feel like the most dangerous thing in her world was the thing she hadn't noticed coming. It wasn't safety. She understood that clearly. It was something more honest than safety, and harder to name, and for tonight, in the specific and careful arithmetic of what she had left and what she hadn't, and who was sitting across from her watching the rain, it was enough to count.